Welcome to the Asking Why podcast. I'm your host, Clint Davis, and today is episode 104. And as you can hear, I got a little cold, so y'all bear with me as I have a serious radio voice today. Normally not this deep, but I'm excited to do it anyway. Today we have Mama Margot with Military Murders True Crime Podcast. And so we've made a connection. We have some mutual friends and relationships, and I listened to several of your episodes recently just to kind of check it out. I personally, working with all the trauma that I do, I'm not a true crimes podcaster, but I know millions and millions of people love listening to it. I don't know what's up with the ladies really loving listening to all these murders, but lots of women love to listen to Dahmer and all these other podcasts. But I'm glad to have you, Margot. Welcome to the show, and I'm excited to get into kind of who you are and what you do.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. So you were former military. And
yes.
Tell us your story a little bit, and how did you get into doing podcasting, and what do you do, and give us that backstory.
So I never in a million years would have thought that I'd be a true crime podcaster. It's just not, really what I had envisioned. And podcasts back in the day were basically non-existent. You were listening to radio and stuff.
Right.
But I joined the Air Force as a judge advocate. So I went to law school because I wanted to help people. And then when I became a lawyer, I realized it was very difficult to help mass amount of people. You were just helping onesies and twosies here and there. And then working in the military, you never really could become an expert. So I was on active duty for 11 years. I did various different roles, military justice wise. And I think it's so crazy because even though I became a military attorney, I never really thought I would be doing lots of crimes or anything like that. I was like, well, there's no crimes that happen in the military. And then I got on active duty and I realized, sadly, that that's not the case. And there was a lot of kind of people committing small crimes, and then there were big crimes. And I call myself a true crime junkie, just listening to or watching Investigation Discovery and watching TV shows like Snapped. I realized that there had been so many military cases that we really didn't hear about. Even working in the legal office, if there was a murder that had been committed somewhere, it was rare, unless you were trying to keep up with military true crime news, that you would ever hear about it. And I was more just a consumer, never really thought too much about it. But, I was always raised to kind of be aware of my surroundings and be careful wherever I was. And so being a Jersey girl, I was always watching my surroundings. And then at one point, I got the amazing opportunity to become a special victims counsel, which I used to represent victims of sex assault in court martials.
Oh, wow.
And so I had clients of all ages, from children to adults. And I think that this is kind of where my mindset changed, where at one point, one of my clients told me, I never thought that I would ever have been abused by a person in the military.
Oh, wow.
And so as soon as they said that, it was kind of a constant thing that I kept hearing was, I can't believe this happened to me. And I wasn't quite sure. I was like, is it because the person was so trustworthy? And really, the reason why people said this was because of the uniform that they wear. You don't expect military members who, are here to protect and serve to be a perpetrator. And so you kind of tend to, drop your guard, maybe be more trusting. I mean, and you were in the military, we don't really travel with our family. Like, I'm talking about like the extended family. We travel with our, core family. But whenever you go somewhere, you have to write down who's going to pick up your kid in case of an emergency. And you're like, hey, neighbor, I know I just met you, but can you be my emergency contact?
Right.
And so you create these friendships so quickly. And it was through clients telling me this, and then through my own kind of back research, that I was like, how can I help more people in my role as an attorney? And I realized that as a young girl, I was always a storyteller. Storytelling is what I like to do when I was in high school, and I wanted to kind of tap into that. So when podcasting became a thing, and then true crime podcast became a thing, I wanted to find my niche. I was like, how can I niche down? And I started my podcast, Military Murder. Originally, I will say this. There are still more men in the military than women. And I remember being almost, I remember being very intimidated by making myself, voting myself into the role of storyteller for this.
Yeah.
And I had to kind of overcome that. I was like, how can I overcome this? And I think one day I was just like, okay, I mean, there's all these other people who are actually prosecuting these cases and they're not out there telling the stories. So could I do it from kind of like a reporter standpoint or a researcher standpoint? And that's kind of where I went in. I also wanted to, and we talked about this briefly before we started pressing record, or before we pressed record, was I wanted to be a neutral, I guess, arbiter, a neutral storyteller. So when I first started the podcast, I didn't tell people what my rank was. I didn't tell people that I had even served. I didn't tell people what branch I was in because I didn't want to paralyze any particular branch or any particular gender or anything like that. And it really has served me for the amount of time that I've been doing this, which is going on 4 years here in November.
Yeah.
And I've been able to tell so many stories, over 200 stories,
Wow.
where family members will reach out to me and all of my research is just my own research based. There will be occasional times where I'll reach out to family members to tell me to fill in the gaps. But for the most part, it's all research based because I want to tell the story from a neutral standpoint. But there will be times where family members will reach out to me or victims will reach out to me and they will be like, thank you for sharing this story. We didn't think people would care. Or people will reach out to me and say, this happened to me in secret and I never reported it. And I'm very happy that you are out there telling people to be careful or to remain vigilant. And so, I kind of started it a little bit as a hobby thinking maybe I'll get 10 listeners.
Yeah.
And, here we are 4 years in, a few million downloads in, and it's just absolutely amazing.
That's awesome. A few million downloads. That's crazy.
Yeah.
That's crazy. I mean, that's what you do full time now, right? Is that what you do mainly?
Yeah.
Okay.
I do that full time.
When'd you get out?
So I got out in 2021. I was on active duty for 11 years. And I'm going to be honest, when I first joined the military, I was like, I'm doing this for 4 years. I'm going corporate law. I'm going to go. I'm not going to have any kids. Like, this is what I'm going to do.
Right.
Clearly, life was a little bit different for me. I did get married in the military. I had 2 kids at the time, and I was pregnant with my third when I decided to press the eject button. It was almost like, it was just very difficult. COVID happened 2020. Then I got pregnant with my third, and it was so difficult at the time. I was part of a dual military couple. I am now since divorced, but in 2021, I was like, I'm going to leave. I've been doing the podcast for 2 years. I'm going to do the full-time mom thing. I'm going to do the full-time podcast thing. And 2022, the podcast, to a certain extent, it was weird. It was me leaving the military that really propelled my podcast to become even more, because I was able to do more like promotion.
Yep.
I was able to do more like TikToks and Instagram, and I was more willing to show my face and things. I did transfer to the reserve, so I'm still, a part of the military, but I'm not doing it full time, active duty every day.
Okay, so you're in
addition to the podcast.
You're in the reserve still.
I am. Mm-hmm.
Okay, awesome. So you're doing like 1 week in a month, 2 weeks out of the year, all that stuff.
So I'm an IMA, which means I just have to do my 2 weeks a year, and then I have to do an extra 2 weeks throughout the year. So one full month.
Awesome. Okay. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I didn't realize that. One of my best friends is a National Guard recruiter, and so I get to hear about all of the ins and outs of that stuff all the time every week. It's wild.
Yes. I really don't know how people do the traditional guard, traditional reserve with the 1 weekend a month plus a regular job. And then now that I'm a single mom, I'm like, where do people even find time or resources?
Oh yeah. I feel like he's always at drill. He's like, no, it's once a month. And I'm like, no, dude, like it feels like you're always at drill or always at something. And it's
exactly.
Wild.
Yeah.
Okay. Awesome. Well, what really, so when you were in the military, were you JAG? Is that what the position was? What was your, okay. So, I mean, that had to be pretty wild.
Yeah, it was. I was just talking to someone recently. I was like, you people don't realize this, but the JAGs do they play so many different roles. And at one point, the more senior you get, the less in the weeds you are, and you're more like a leader, and you're counseling people on different subjects, on ethics and things like that. But it is a really amazing role, and you can take it in so many different directions. At least in the Air Force, I know for sure. But it was. It took me everywhere. I'm gonna be honest with you. When I joined the Air Force as a JAG, I was like, no way I'm going to be deploying.
Yeah.
I get to my second duty assignment. I had just gotten there. I was a newlywed. I was stationed in California. I got to Germany. I no kidding, must have sat down at my desk. My boss walks in. He goes, there comes a time in every young JAG's life. And I was like, I had no idea what he's going to tell me.
Yeah.
And then he goes, when you gotta take one for the team and deploy. And I was like, are you kidding me? Like, I literally just got here.
Yeah.
But, I will say this. When I deployed to Afghanistan, I remember being petrified. I was like, what the f- am I supposed to do there? Like, I'm a JAG. Like,
Yeah.
I did do my weapons training and I did all this, but I didn't feel like I was, competent to fight. But,
Yep.
you do what you have to do for your country. And I went and it was almost like a perspective change that I really needed. It was like a kick in the butt that I really needed. And I have learned from a lot of veterans that they felt the same way when they first got to Afghanistan or whatever other country
Yeah.
they may have been to. But I was basically like a little spoiled brat. I remember getting to Germany. That was my second assignment. And I remember feeling some sort of way. I was like, kind of, just this American girl. And I was like, oh my God, I can't read anything. This is so overwhelming. Like, I just felt this overwhelm. And I was like, I really want to go back to the States. And then I got sent to Germany. I got sent to Afghanistan. And I remember when I got to Afghanistan, I was like, Germany's not that bad.
Yeah.
So after I did my tour there, and I learned a lot of different things. I got to work with a lot of different branches, the Navy, the Army. I got to really tour the area. And I got back to Germany. It was almost like there was nothing that the world could throw at me that I didn't feel like I could take. Because I was like, man, yeah, really. And so it really was an opportunity that I needed. And I was glad that I got it.
Yeah, that's awesome. Where'd you go to Afghanistan?
I was mostly in Mazar-e Sharif, which was the north with the Germans.
Okay.
And so I spent time there. I spent, that was Camp Kunduz, which, when you're stationed with the Germans, it's like, is it really a deployment anyway?
Yeah.
But then I was at
They have all the
Phoenix and
good
I was
food.
yeah. And so, and I was there for like Christmas and Thanksgiving. And it really, to a certain extent kind of felt like college, but and something bad could really happen.
Yeah, definitely. College with mortar rounds and,
Oh yeah. Yeah. Now you definitely, as a Christian, you tend to a certain extent, lose your fear of death, especially when you're at war. Because I remember getting to Afghanistan and I literally just told God, I was like, all right, I'm in your hands.
Mm-hmm.
I was like, if it's my time to go, it's my time to go whenever or wherever I am. And I remember getting to Afghanistan the very first day, and there was a mortar attack in the middle of the night. And I slept through it because I can actually sleep through just about anything. And I slept through it. And I had been traveling for like 48 hours to get there. And this guy's like knocking on my door. He's like, what are you doing? And I was like, what's happening? He's like, get your gear on. We got to go. And so we all get there. And I remember just being there like, this is crazy.
Oh,
so
yeah.
it was definitely an interesting experience. And I have so much respect for veterans who were out there actually doing the damn thing,
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, I'll never forget when we came in, we were at Bagram and I went in 2003. So this is right after, the war really took off. Yep. And so, because I did basic during 9/11, so I'm on the rifle range when the towers got hit. So I'm like, oh, this is a change of plans, right? So then I think 9 months later, we're going to Afghanistan. I just turned 20, like 3 days earlier. Oh. And we land, C-130, we land, and the doors drop. It's pitch black. And this guy walks on and he pops a chem light and holds it up and he says, get back to back or chest to back and hold onto your gear, walk in the line, do not take a step left or right. There's landmines everywhere. You will blow up, follow the chem light. And he just starts walking in the dark. So we get all our stuff on and we're just walking in this line and you're holding somebody in front of you like this, like, you don't want to take a left or right. And then I don't remember, we got off the flight line and, went to our places and everything. But a few months later, I was back at like the flight line and I realized like the whole thing was concrete. He was just trying to prepare us for what off the flight line was going to be like right off the gate. But, it was wild. And mortar rounds, yeah. I remember one night we were we were going to, there was like one night that they had like a clamshell and they were doing like some kind of light show within the clamshell forest. It was some cheesy thing. And
Hmm.
all of the guys were walking across we were all leaving and walking across this volleyball court. And, we started getting mortar attacks and we all had to just bail and run and go get all our stuff. And yeah, it's just, those are things like I look back and I'm like, I don't know if you feel like this, but it's like, is that a movie? Did that really happen? Am I making that up? Like just things in your life that now, being a counselor doing podcasts, I'm like, that seems so crazy.
Yeah, like it's almost weird. Like even just talking about it, you're just like, I can't believe that was real life. Yeah.
Okay, so you mentioned being a Christian. So how did your faith kind of play into all of that, and when did maybe your walk with Christ get more mature, or tell me that story or that part of it.
Yeah. So it's kind of interesting, right? When you grow up in church, because whenever people ask you that question, you're like, well, I grew up a Christian. And then you start to think about it. You're like, yeah, I know, but I did all that other stuff.
Yeah.
You think about that play in between where you're like, hey, Jesus, can you forget about that one point in my life where, you
Hmm.
know? So I grew up Christian, and I will say that I am so thankful for I grew up with my grandma. My parents had me when they were teenagers and they were, young and crazy. And so I grew up with my grandma, and she really raised me up in the church. But the thing about, I wouldn't say a religion or Christianity or whatever it is, I think there's so much religion that can come with it, like religion in the you have to be so rigid, that I remember picking and choosing. Like, I don't think that that's accurate. Like, I can wear earrings, like I can wear pants, like, I can wear, I feel like I grew up in a cult now that I say it like that. But I kind of took that with me. And so I would say that my faith in God really, there has been a few pivotal points in my life where it has really matured. And I would say first, it was when I was in Afghanistan. It was where I just felt, I was like, well, okay, I gotta get my life right. And so that was one of the points where I remember praying a lot, and I remember, like God revealing Himself to me in certain events that happened where I was like, it was literally a dream. But even till this day, whenever I come up against like a pivotal point in my life, I remember that. And I'm like, okay, God's got this. Like, I'm fine,
Yeah.
like, and sometimes you do have that voice where you're like, I'm fine. I'm fine. And then you don't feel fine, but you're fine. Like, you're going to be fine. And so, I remember it was that point. And then, more recently, I would say as I was transitioning from being a military spouse to being now, divorced, I think that was another point where I was like, this is not what I envisioned for
Right.
my life. And God, and I really had to get real close with God, because I didn't quite understand. You know what I mean? Like, I was
Yeah.
like, I don't understand. But it was through the power of prayer that it was revealed to me that everything happens for a reason. And sometimes we're asking, we make decisions and then we ask God to co-sign them. We're like, this is what I want to do. And then you make the decision and you're like, hey, God, can you go ahead and sign this for me?
Can you put this in your
and,
will?
can you go ahead and is this cool? And then, sometimes, God will let you keep falling just like our children do. Our children will not listen and they'll keep doing it. And then eventually God is like, all right, you ready to let me take the wheel?
Yep.
And so I have felt that in a lot of different ways. And so now in this new chapter in my life, I feel like every day I'm getting a little bit closer, and I'm realizing that it's not, that it's more of a community versus like you just being a Christian in silence,
Hmm.
if that makes sense. Because I
Oh,
feel like a lot of
100%.
times you're like, I'm just going to keep my faith to myself. Like, why do I need to tell people about who I am or what I believe in? Like, I don't want people to think I'm crazy. You know what I mean?
Yeah. In the
But
cult.
yeah,
In the cult.
in the cult, yes.
Yeah. I think that's an interesting thing. I mean, there's a million ways we can go, but I think that is one thing. Like, people listen to this, that listen to your podcast, that listen to the true crime. Probably lots of people who aren't Christians. I think when they hear stories of you can't wear earrings or you can't have a sip of alcohol, or a lot of what it's is legalism, right? It's just this:
Right.
we have to follow the law. We have to do these behaviors to please God so that we can essentially make Him happy and atone for the bad things. And
Right.
And that's ultimately the old covenant, right? That's the entire, in the Bible, we have the Old Testament and the New Testament. The Old Testament is the old covenant. It's we needed sacrifices and burnt offerings because we were sinful and broken, and we had to make up for all these behavior things. And also because God's like, these things are actually good for you. You might not want to murder people. You might not want to sleep with other people's wives. You might not want to worship things that don't give you anything. You might not want to lie and steal, and like, the things that he's commanding them to do are actually good for them. And if they
Right.
do, if they violate those commandments, it's going to go bad.
Mm-hmm.
However, they're stuck in this constant cycle of, I need to redeem myself, I need to restore myself, I need to repent and pay. And so the Western church has really kept a lot of that old mentality, that old covenant, as if your behavior somehow or your good deeds make you right with God. And the
Right.
reality is, right, where to clear that up, it's like, well, the new covenant, the New Testament is the story of Christ and Jesus and how he came to live a perfect life and die a sinner's death and pay for our sins and our suffering, so that we could be atoned for, so that our behavior doesn't really matter. And I don't mean that our behavior doesn't matter in the sense that we should be fruitful. We should be loving and patient and kind and gentle and have self-control and have faithfulness and goodness and, all
Mm-hmm.
these fruits of the Spirit. But those behaviors don't set us right with God. We're already set right with God because of what Jesus did. And so I think a lot of people look at religion as rule following, as a lack of fun, as restriction,
Yeah.
and rightly so. Look at the world and look at a lot of the religions and look at a lot of the Christians who are so focused on doing the right things, behaving the right way, performing, but that's not the gospel. And so
Right.
I think that, I think that's what you've figured out and are walking out and trying to, and we all are, right, moment to moment, day
Mm-hmm.
to day.
Exactly. No, and I think, when as my children, so when we lived in Louisiana, my children, they went to a Christian school, and it was amazing because they would come home with all these like tidbits of information, and they would just speak life into me, and I was like, this little tiny 4-year old is just speaking life, and you just recited the fruit of the spirit, and I think that recently I was like, oh my gosh, like this is so simple. It is so simple, and I think
Recomplicate
with
it.
my right, even with my true crime podcast, I am like, do people realize how simple it is? If you're in a relationship that if you don't want to be with that person, don't kill them. Like literally just walk away. I mean, it is so mind blowing that I am like, do you realize that now you are locked in a box for the rest of your life, sentenced to death? You've ruined so many lives. And so that's really, and people, I sometimes make light of it in a very respectful manner. But I always I'm always like, do people not realize that in this pivotal moment, if you would just breathe and think about what you're about to do, don't do it, and then literally just turn around or turn away or think about your consequences, there could be, such a better life. You hear
Mm-hmm.
about these people who are just able to turn their life around without taking such a drastic measure. And right before I got on recording, I'm actually working through a script right now, and it's so frustrating because, like I said, it's so simple. It's so simple. Keep your hands to yourself and don't murder anyone, and life will be good
Yep.
for the most part.
If it was only that simple, right? I mean, I think
If it
that's kind
was.
of the as a therapist working with people all day long who, they present a behavior that is extremely toxic. I mean, they yell at each other, they cheated on each other, they're addicted, they're depressed, they're anxious. The symptom, right, is we could all look at it and go, just don't do it. There's an old skit where this therapist is like, stop it. And that's kind of the joke is like they come in, they pay him, and he's like, well, stop doing that,
Yeah. Yeah.
and if it was only that simple. And the question I think
If it was.
we're constantly having to ask and that Jesus asks of people is, well, why, right? I mean, the title of this is asking why, because it's like, why do people murder, right? When you really get into the root of it and you look at the true crime and you look through, it's pain. It's somebody's in so much emotional and spiritual pain for so long, for so many reasons. that they just snap and do something that on the surface seems like an obvious no. It's like,
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
obviously you shouldn't shoot heroin in your arm.
Right.
Obviously you shouldn't murder someone. Obviously you shouldn't rob a bank. But
Right.
people are so far into the narrative and the lostness and the victimhood and the shame that they're living in a kind of third dimension of they're not in reality.
Right. No, I mean you're 100% right because I mean we none of us would be here. We'd be like, okay, you need to just stop thinking about that. Especially when you're going through a betrayal, you're going through whatever. It's so easy to say, well, just leave or just walk away or just. But I mean, and the power of one prayer, also the power, like you just said, of therapy and people. And I preach therapy, all the time. I'm like, guys, I'm like, it is so important to get someone. And I feel like the veteran community does have a hard time finding.
Mm-hmm.
It has to be someone like in your whatever your network, your insurance network, and it's going to be someone on base, and you're like, well, I don't really trust this person. I don't feel like telling them.
Well, you're asking the system that's either harmed you or abused you or neglected you or burns you out. You're asking that system that you don't trust to be the safe place. And I
Mm-hmm.
think that's changing, right? I think now TRICARE is allowing people to kind of pick their own doctor, pick their own therapist in some ways. But for
Okay, good.
years, I mean, that's something that people don't understand is that um, you're asking military people who have been abandoned by the system or hurt by the system to trust the system, and that's the
Mm-hmm.
antithesis of anti-therapy, right? Because the reason therapy is helpful is you have a safe environment, you have a curated environment in which the person is somebody who is there for you, is going to keep your secrets, is going to listen to you, is going to empathize with you, and you know, it's the same thing with religious trauma. People get hurt by their pastor, and then people are like, "Well, just go to church, just pray more, just do this." And it's like, well, I did do that, and this person hurt me, and now you're asking me to
Right.
to go back to the same thing to find healing, and it's very difficult.
No, you're right. And thinking about that, I've talked to a lot of people in the military through my podcast or just through my job or just through all my friends that are military. And they have a really hard time finding a therapist. And I heard recently actually people are like, it's really hard to find a therapist post COVID because everyone is seeking help somehow.
Yeah, you see these good or bad. You see BetterHelp, and you see text therapy and phone call therapy, and all of that stuff. I'm glad we live in a world where there is more access because there's just not enough people helping. Um, but the reality is relationships, being in the room with somebody, right, is so important, is so vital because it's that connection, it's that energy that's shared, it's the empathy, it's the leaning in. Like those things are
Mm-hmm.
so important for people to find healing. And of course, you don't have to have that. You can get good therapy, and just like this podcast, right, we're having a great conversation, we're connected, there's vulnerability, there's shared experience, and that's good. But
Right.
there's so few people out there who are trained, who have trauma training, who are equipped to deal with some of the nuances of the military that are specific to that. And
Mm-hmm.
it's, when I have veterans and see veterans, or when like one of my therapists is a firefighter, and so when he sees first responders or he sees people with trauma, you're not just reading from a book. You're able to
Right.
tell your story a little bit and share that experience, and I think that's the difference in sympathy and empathy. And again, it's not that you have to have had brain surgery to be a brain surgeon, but it certainly knocks down some walls for vulnerable populations like the military or women or trafficking victims when you have a little bit of experience to that trauma and you've come out the other side and are using it for good, because there's hope
Exactly.
there that
Yep.
you can literally say, like, listen, I don't know your story, I haven't experienced the exact same thing, but here's a little bit of what I've been through, and now look at me. One of my friends in high school died this week, and I'm going this afternoon to the wake and then tomorrow to speak at the funeral.
I'm
And
sorry.
it's okay. It's crazy to think of. I always tell my clients not to say it's okay. It's not okay. It sucks, but it's gonna be okay. But
Yeah.
I was thinking about going back, and I'm going to see a bunch of people from high school that I haven't seen in 20 years, and me and this friend went through some rough seasons. We
Mm-hmm.
drank, we drugged, we did a bunch of things to survive,
Mm-hmm.
and yet we were so close for like 5 years, and he was such a life raft for me and me for him. And both of us, healed and gotten healthier and have our own businesses. And, it's 25 years ago at this point, maybe longer. And it's interesting to go back tomorrow and see all these people and, want to give them a message of hope. And that message is, yeah, I was a mess. And in some ways I still am, but look what God can do in spite of our behaviors and in spite of our stuff. A lot of bad can be outweighed by just a little bit of good.
Yeah, 100%. It's true. And you have to be healed to go back to that place, right? I feel like a lot of people, I'm in the same age where it's like you go back home and you want to fall back to those tendencies that you used to have. And it's the same with the military. I mean, because
oh yeah.
You could have been a hot mess. You're like a saintly person now. And then all of a sudden your friend is like, hey, all the vets are in town. We're going to get together. And you're like, who did I become? Like, what is going on? Who am I? Yeah, exactly. So you have to be healed enough to know when you can go back into that situation. Right.
That's so
and like
good.
you said, kind of speak to, hey, this is who I am now.
Yeah. What do you think? What about therapy, mental health, what were some of the pivotal things that you would encourage maybe some veterans that have gotten out or that are still in? What are some things that you can encourage them about that being healthy to do?
Well, first of all, I think there are times, I have weekly therapy and sometimes I'm like, I am great. In my head, I probably don't need therapy anymore. And then literally something will happen the very next day and it feels like my life is falling apart. And I'm like, oh my God, I feel like I'm going to die. I can't breathe.
Yeah.
You see, I said that all in one breath. And then when I see my therapist again, he's like, oh, how did it go? But mind you, then there'll be a couple of days in between. I feel like I'm fine. And then I'll share. I'll be like, I had to take a note. I remembered that this happened. And it's good to have someone who, you don't want to, unfortunately, I feel bad for therapists, by the way, because you have so many people telling you all the crappy things in their life.
Yeah, well, we got to go to therapy.
Then you have to go to therapy, exactly. But I feel so bad, like having to bleed on my family members or on my good friends, like always telling them the same thing. They're probably like, girl, I don't want to hear your story anymore. Like, are you not over this yet? That's how people feel. So it's nice to have someone who is a neutral, kind of a neutral arbiter. They're not really, there's no argument here, but there's a neutral person who you're kind of sharing your life experiences with. You're just like, hey, I woke up and I wanted to have a good day. And then my kid did this and it really just threw me for a loop or whatever it is. So I think therapy is so important because there's so many, especially as a military person. I know everybody has life things, but speaking specifically as a veteran, as a mom, as a business owner, like you have so many different things thrown your way. And sometimes you really are just like, I'm going to go AWOL. Like I'm not going to respond to this email from the military, even as a reservist. I'm like, I am not going to respond to this email because this is XYZ.
It's too much.
It's too much. I'm like, I can't do this. I can't do this on top of everything else I have to do. But therapy is so important because it really does bring things into perspective. At the same time, though, I will say this. One of the things that I have found in addition to therapy is building a team of people that you can rely on, like a core group of people in your life. And hopefully, they're smart, they're stable emotionally, you know what I mean? And you can go to those people for your life things. If you have other things you want to talk about, then you can call your one friend who is crazy or whatever it is. But have your core group of people that you kind of go to. I'm pretty blessed that a lot of my core, they're a whole bunch of attorneys. So there are situations in my life where I can't lawyer for myself because I'm a mom or because of this situation. So I don't even try. Why would I try to lawyer for myself when I am thinking like not a lawyer? I'm thinking like, I am going to destroy you. That's what I'm going to do. You know what I mean? And so I have my core group of people that I go to in situations. And what I do, this is what I do personally. And maybe I'm a little bit, cuckoo, but I like to take people's advice in pieces. Like some people can give really, really good advice on this one topic and then they get off kilter on this other thing. And you're like, I don't really think that's a good idea, but I will take this piece and I'll take this piece. And I kind of do this puzzle piece of like, this is how we do it. And that's how you do it in the law, by the way. So as an attorney, you do that. You pick different pieces of this case and this case and this case, and you kind of make your own puzzle piece. And this is how I'm going to be whole, or this is how I'm going to try. And so that's what's good. And I definitely advise people to have a core group of people that they can rely on and know that they can call them if they need.
Yeah, it's awesome. Yeah, in other words, community, right? It's like
exactly
that's one of the biggest problems that I think had been going on forever that COVID really revealed to us was the lack of community and the isolationism that we have as a country and as a church. You know, when you have to go back, we all deal with hard things. And I think as Christians, especially, we're supposed to be dealing with hard things. We're supposed to be throughout the week serving and leading and mentoring and pouring into people and, being the hands and feet. But we need a soft place to come back to. We need those people who can encourage us and direct us and hold us accountable and guide us. And we say all these things a lot of times from the platform in church, but then there's really not anything but going home and isolating and watching Netflix and scrolling on our phones and trying to manage our children for the 2.5 hours at night where we have them. And then hopefully they go to bed, clean everything up. And then by 9:15, right, you're about to pass out because you're like, oh my gosh, I just spent an hour trying to put this kid to get down and give him a bath and, start the whole thing again. Right. I don't know how old your kids are, but that's my afternoons.
Oh no! Literally, you just explained it to a T, and I just had a moment this morning where I was like, I can't do this. I literally cannot do. Like, put your clothes on. Like, seriously, can you just sit on the toilet and pee? Like,
right.
And I think as a society, when we realize that we're not alone, and I think the thing about Christians, about being a Christian, and also about giving our testimony, is the idea that people know you're not perfect, and sometimes it's scary. Because you're like, oh, I used that curse word that one time on my podcast, or I really think this person deserved the death penalty. And like, I don't care. I'm not Jesus. I can't forgive you for what you've done. Like, you know what I mean? Like, and you kind of feel this sense of, am I a good Christian?
Mm-hmm.
Like, am I a good enough Christian that I could put myself out there as a Christian? Because everyone's going to judge me. But I think we're moving towards a society where people realize no one's perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And the minute you show that vulnerability, people are like, oh crap, she's a good mom. Like, yeah, she had a bad moment this today, but she's a good mom, and she's a good Christian, or whatever it is. You know what I mean?
Yeah, what I think is that people are begging for authenticity, mm-hmm. which goes back to what we talked about earlier is, authenticity, it means safety, and so the reason therapy works is that it's safe because it's authentic to a degree. I think that's the same reason why therapy doesn't work, though. I think there are a lot of clinicians and people who have been trained to be a blank slate, and that therapy is just this kind of clinical, neutral thing that's just for the client. And what I hear from a lot of people is that's why they don't like it, is that it feels, you go in, you don't know your therapist, they never share anything, they're very neutral. How do you feel about that? That's tough. What do you think you should do about that? And then, you do that for 50 minutes and then you leave, and it's not unhelpful, right? It's not totally unhelpful. And again, if that's how people want to do their practice, by all means do it. But for me, what I hear from clients is, oh man, I want to have something, I want a conversation. I want to be challenged. Mm-hmm. I want to be directed. I'm here because I have no clue what I'm doing, and I need you to tell me what's healthy and what's good and what's right. And that, especially from a Christian perspective, people want guidance and want to be shepherded and want to have a relationship. And yes, obviously it's a different relationship than you would have with a pastor or a friend or whatever. But mm-hmm. I think authenticity is the missing piece. And so I think we live in a world where people have so much trauma and have been exposed to so many things and so much inauthenticity that they're yearning for connection and authentic connection. And so but it's the polarity, man. It's like, on one hand, we got cancel culture where you can't have any mess ups and you can't have any screw ups, and you're gonna get canceled. And then you have the other side where most people are desperate to go, just be honest and be vulnerable and be who you are, and I'll accept you. And it's those two worlds are colliding, because it's like, that's not necessarily true. You want that, but you also will, crucify me if I don't do it all exactly how you think right is. And so I think that's a pressure cooker for a lot of us.
It really is. I found, I don't know if I can say the name of another podcast, but in my recent season, I found a podcast by the name of Real Talk Kim, and she's a pastor, and she has gone through some stuff, and she talks about like doing drugs and like sitting on her mom's couch and her mom like testifying to her while she's like high. And it's I think it's that authenticity that really draws me to her. I mean, clearly she's saying, do not live that life,
Yeah.
but there is life after a situation like this. She talks about getting up after you have fallen. And I think that in hers, she actually did a sermon recently where she said, some of y'all can pull up some old videos of me in the club. She goes, I'll be the first one to post it and show, yes, that is who I was. That is who I used to be. But now I am this new person.
Yeah.
So I think it's one of those things of, I'm not sure if it's considered getting ahead of it or just taking it for what it is. But you have to realize that once something comes out, if you're just honest and that's one of the biggest things, when you talk about the armor of God, the first thing is the belt of truth. And in just being honest, there is so much freedom.
Oh yeah, because
You
nobody
know?
can nail you to the wall. I mean, I think I've said this on the podcast before, but I try to live a life of radical honesty with the people that are safe for me and that are close to me, so that if something came out, those 5 to 10 people would be like, "Oh yeah, we talk about that all the time." If one of my
Mm-hmm.
flaws or mistakes or something popped off, they wouldn't be like, "Oh, I've never heard Clint cuss, and so he cussed on the podcast, and now, oh my gosh," or I'm having a glass of wine and somebody's like, "What?" Like he pretended as if he never drank and he spoke against alcohol and condemned everybody for it, but then he's having a glass. That's the stuff that drives people crazy. That's the
Yes.
hypocrisy of like, it's not just be like, it's not claiming Christ and then being imperfect. Like, of course, we're all hypocrites that way. What's really toxic is speaking out against things all the time and then acting as if you never struggle with it or it's not also a thing that you have to battle, And I think
Mm-hmm.
that's the inauthenticity that Christianity or the allure of religious Christianity in Western America, Western church has been such a problem because it's a lot of don't do this, and if you find Jesus, you never will want to. And then, bam, some pastor gets called out for this, or some youth pastor does this, and
Uh-huh.
yeah, it's a mess.
Exactly. No, it's true.
All right, let's get to in the little time we got left, let's talk about maybe just the podcast in general and the true crime thing, and what is it that really for our listeners that love your show, what are some things maybe you want them to know about it, kind of the behind the scenes aspects of it? I'd love to hear more about that.
I think every podcast is different. You can listen to 10 different true crime podcasts and everybody tells the stories differently. And so for me, it's, when you listen to my show, someone will die. Like that's just,
Yeah,
I did that for a
I
reason.
was listening to the train track one earlier.
Yes, yes, yes. So someone will die in an episode, and it's tragic. I think what in telling the stories, what I want people to pick up on is really the red flags that we
Mm-hmm.
all tend to ignore. I mean, listen, I will put myself as the leader of ignoring red flags. I thought, is that a red flag or are we going to the circus? Which one is it? You know what I
Yeah.
mean? And so I think most of my stories, as if you listen to all 200, they all have little things here and there where you can pick up if you're in an unhealthy or in a toxic relationship, let's say, for example, or a toxic, a relationship doesn't just have to be a husband and a spouse. It doesn't have to be spouses. It could be a good friend or, someone that you met on Facebook Marketplace and you're going to meet them for an exchange of baby clothes or whatever it is.
Yeah.
But it's one of those things where you just have to, once you know enough and you hear the same thing, you're like, something isn't right.
Mm-hmm.
And so my goal is literally for people to listen to the show and be able to, one, protect themselves, but then two, protect other people. And the thing with military culture, and it's not just military culture, it could be college culture, it could be whatever,
Sure.
is that a lot of people say things, and maybe you could speak to this because I'm interested in this. A lot of people speak things in a joking manner.
Mm-hmm.
And you're like, oh, that's so funny. And then they do the thing that they said, which isn't funny, is actually illegal, and you will go to jail for a very long time. And then you're like, oh crap, they said this so many times and I didn't pick up on it because I just thought it was a joke.
Yep.
But if people actually start paying attention to what people are saying and they say it enough times that you're like, let me call this person out for their BS, basically. One of the things that I see in a lot of the cases I cover also is that people will say this jokingly to a lot of different people. They will literally say, I want to hire a hitman to kill my wife. Like they will say that in a group of 5 people. And then the 5 people will be like, oh, haha, that's so funny. And then the person will say it again in a couple of weeks. And the people will be like, haha, that's so funny. And then the person ends up dead. And the people are like, oh, I should have said something, or I should have discouraged them to do that.
That's good.
So I think that's like my big takeaway is just to a certain extent. And I know you said sometimes common sense isn't common, but sometimes the more you harp on common sense, the more that you will kind of be like, okay, I covered recently, just FYI, a very recent attempted murder case where the person, I don't think the person had listened. The coffee machine one. Yeah. I mean, this guy was so smart to basically not ignore the red flags.
Yep.
Anybody else would have not said anything. And I think, like I said in my little episode, if he would have continued living there, the wife could have just taken a gun.
Let's do this. Can you just tell that story a little bit? Let's do a little of the true crime on here.
Yeah. So it's actually a breaking case. I started this new segment on my podcast called Breaking News. They're like 10 minutes or less where I just take a new news story and I tell it on the podcast. Of course, I will say all perpetrators are innocent until proven guilty in a court of law. So let's just say she's innocent, but this is what we have, right? Yeah. So there was this airman in Germany who he was separated from his wife, but they were still living together, which, by the way, is very common. And I would advise people to not, if you can afford to not live with that person, don't, because you never know. But they continued to live together, and she continued to make his coffee in the morning. And so by make his coffee, she would just, I'm assuming it's a Keurig, and she would pour the water into the reservoir, and then in the morning he would put his cup in, press the coffee button, and it would come out. At one point, his coffee tasted funny. He was like, this don't taste right. And I'm not sure what it tasted like, but I knew he thought it didn't taste right. So instead of continuing to drink it, he went and bought some testing strips and tested the water in his house. The water was fine. When he put the testing strip in the water reservoir, it was high levels of chlorine. Mm-hmm. So at that point, he was like, well, she's the one that makes it, so she must be trying to kill me. So he puts up cameras around the house, and sure enough, he sees that she's pouring something in there. Now, they're in the process of moving from Germany to the U.S. He doesn't want to, it's this whole legal jurisdiction thing. So he waits till they get back to the U.S. They're living in temporary lodging. He sets up his camera. He's pretending to drink it, by the way. Mm-hmm. So she's thinking that maybe she's got him. Yep. And he continues to pretend he's drinking it. He puts up the cameras. He ends up reporting her. The police, now mind you, a lot of people they will make it seem like male victims of domestic violence are making it all up. It's the same for women, victims of domestic violence. But in this particular case, the police were like, well, they're not investigating it. So he's like, okay, so you want to know what she's actually putting in it. He goes back. He puts up more cameras in his house. Now, he's really smart because he's not putting up a security camera. He's putting them up in like the fire extinguisher. So she doesn't know that it's in there. Mm-hmm. And he catches her in the laundry room, pouring bleach into a little container, taking it to the kitchen, and then pouring it into his coffee machine. He takes it to the cops, and she eventually gets arrested for attempted murder, domestic violence, and also poisoning. Mm. And so she's still in jail right now. And there's, whether she's going to get bail or not, she's a flight risk because she's originally from the Philippines. And so this airman really did save his own life. He solved his own case. Yeah. Now, I'm not going to say he listens to my podcast, but I am saying that this is what I hope people will do.
That's good. I like that. I like that it's, from your perspective, you're not just, because I think one of the things people think of when it's like these kind of things is, well, you're just, capitalizing off of someone's murder or off of their death or whatever. But the reality is these things have happened. And especially in the military, I think it's hyper protected. And I know you and I would both, you're still in the military. I'm still, friends with tons of people, love the military. But it's just like any other population of people. There's good and bad people. And there's a lack of support, a lack of mental health support. And so you're going to have things that happen. And I think that process of us going, well, military people are heroes, and there's, the greatest thing you can do is lay your life down for a friend, scripture says. So they lay their lives down. They're so honorable. They're so amazing. They're so loyal. They're so trained, as if that means they don't have severe mental health problems and relational problems and family trauma and all this stuff. They do. So I think with what you do, for people who like to listen to it, those type of stories and hearing how it happens, it can paint a picture. Yes, specifically for the military. I think you're the only one who's doing what you're doing, which is crazy. I mean, out of all the podcasts and all the things, you're the only military true crime podcast. So I would say you're the number one in the world. You might not say that.
I'll take it. I'll take it.
It's like people say, you're a good therapist. I'm like, I'm one of the only male therapists you can find. So maybe I'm not that great. The reality is that you're doing something that is a ministry, I think. I mean, that is giving back to these people. You're getting their voices heard. You're having their stories told. And then a byproduct of that is people, whether in the military or not, are able to look in their life and go, what's going on? And listen, I would love to be in a world where what we're talking about is so rare and insane, and this is such a small population of people. But the reality is the large majority of the people that have relationships are in toxic relationships, right? It's not like there's this small population of unhealthy people and the rest of us are just, riding high. That's not the case. And so I think it's awesome that you're putting this stuff out and that people can listen to it and go, okay, this is entertaining, it's exciting, it's crazy, but also, man, there's some things I can pull out of it.
Yeah. I'm going to give one more example because I've never given this example before. And I'll say this is a close family friend. So I have a close family friend who's a Marine, and he was married to someone who was, kind of unfaithful. The person was unfaithful, and they were going through a divorce. And just like in this other case, they decided to continue to live in the same house. Apartment. It's like a 2-bedroom. And I remember this person telling me, and it was like a year, like they had been separated for a very long time. And then all of a sudden, this person shared with me that this person was no longer in the Marines, but they shared with me that they had recently purchased a weapon. And I was like, okay. Yeah, I'm kind of a gun nut too. So I was like, okay. But then it was other things about the situation, like, this person came home with a new lover, and they weren't divorced yet. This person came home with a new lover, and I chased down the car, and I remember and this person had an intention to move, like cross country. And I told this person, literally, these were my words, close family friend. I said, please do not kill this person. Please do not ever during an argument take out your gun and display it, even if it's not loaded. I don't care. Do not chase anyone down the street. Do not say I have a gun. Do not say I'm going to put a cap in your, do not do this. And I remember another close family friend calling me and being very upset that I had told this person not to kill someone. And I was like, I don't know why you're mad at me. Like,
That seems obvious, right?
It seems obvious. I mean, don't murder, but I got scolded. Basically they were like, oh, you think everything's true crime? And I was like, okay, whatever. Months later, the person does end up moving, and I discover all this other toxic stuff that this person was doing. And that person actually said, like, even though I laughed at you when you told me that, it really was kind of like a light bulb. Not that they had ever intended to do something like that, but it was almost like they were like, I need to remove myself from this situation because it could be a possibility. Yeah.
Keep on.
No, I was just going to say, like, that is the type of stuff that I want people to be bold enough to say. I got scolded and I was like, don't say those types of things. Like, why would you put that out into the universe? And I was like, well, I'd rather speak to them before they did anything crazy versus speaking to them or about them at their sentencing hearing.
Absolutely. And I think what I was going to interrupt you with, was I got excited. Was that such a theme for so many things in life, whether it's pornography or child abuse or letting your kid be on social media or a marriage issue with money. One of the things that should be a principle to our life is people having access to speaking into our life when they see there's a problem and us not being so offended by it. But we're so offendable, like people getting mad that you give a suggestion that could lead to something and saying, well, you just see this everywhere. I've heard this a lot. I speak all over the country or world now on, abuse prevention and sexual abuse prevention. And, got a book coming out on it in November. And so, those are things that I've heard from people over the last, probably 5 years ago, especially when I started going to churches and schools and organizations to talk on it. People would say things like, well, you're a therapist. And so you just see this all day. You just see the worst cases. And so you just think everything is you're finding boogeymen in all the closets. And in the beginning, I was like, is that what I'm doing? Like, am I making this up? Like, do I just, it's not everybody. It just happens to be everybody who comes in my office. Right. And it's like, well, no, because everybody who comes in my office is a swath of all culture. It's different ethnicities, it's different ages, it's different socioeconomic statuses. And these themes are all there in all of these sessions and all of these moments. And even more so when you just ask a couple of questions, So it's like, it's the same thing. You were afraid to speak truth in each other's lives, to ask hard questions, to mention something. This month is Suicide Awareness Month. And people are afraid to say, hey, are you thinking about killing yourself? Like, you seem really depressed. You've sold your stuff. I don't see you anymore. You're isolated. You're talking about, man, I don't want to be here anymore. Have you ever thought about killing yourself? Are you thinking about killing yourself? That actually reduces the likelihood of it happening. But people think, well, if I put it in their head, they're going to do it. If I tell my 14-year-old about sex, that's going to make them want to have sex. If I tell my 12-year-old that pornography exists on the internet, they're going to go look at pornography. If I mention to my friend, don't shoot your partner that you live with who's bringing home other lovers, like, it's not that far of a stretch here. And so, it just brought all that up for me when you said that, because it's so true. And I think we have to speak in truth and grace at the same time with people. You can't just go in and blast somebody, but you also can't just sit around letting everybody do whatever it is they're wanting to do. You see the red flags, you see what could be a risk, and whether it's a 1% risk or a 5% risk, you choose to go, I'm not going to say anything because that's a hard conversation. And then, somebody's murdered and they're on your True Crime podcast, and everybody in their family's going, I wish somebody would have said something. I wish I would have called that out. I wish I'd have asked this and that.
Exactly. No, 100%. And there have been a lot of cases that I have covered where in sentencing, the person, or even in a confession during an interview, a person will say, well, I told so many people, I figured someone would tell me if I was out of line. And unfortunately, there are a lot of childish personalities, that tend to, a lot of people join the military,
Immature.
at the age of 18, immature, 18 years old. And they only stay in for 4 or 5 years, and they never really leave that mentality. And the military culture is, so people are going to tell me what to do. So if I told someone I'm going to do something and they don't tell me it's wrong, then I guess I might be right.
Yep. Yeah. When you're so encapsulated in that mentality, like, sometimes when I get really stressed out, I miss Afghanistan. Like, I miss knowing I'm going to wear the same thing every day, knowing what my orders are and that they're clear-ish, knowing that I'm going to, like, I can't go anywhere. I don't have a choice. I'm going to go to sleep at the same time. I'm going to get up at the same time. Somebody has prepared all my meals, or I have an MRE in front of me. Like, there's so many things about that time that's so easy and so simple and so spoon-fed to you as a human being. And that sometimes when I get overwhelmed, those are the things that I miss about the military, miss about deployment. But it's so easy to forget about what all comes with that and the rest of that that's not fun, whether it's mortar rounds or getting shot at, or, just being away from America and being dirty and, all the things. And for everybody, obviously, it's on a spectrum, on a spectrum, there's so many more, there's people who suffer with so many more levels of that, whether it's special forces or, whatever. But no matter what, whoever's in the military, we have to keep that perspective that it's so hard when you're in the middle of it to look at things and go, and with rose-colored glasses and go, man, oh, that was all great. That was amazing. I want to go back there, and then forget all the tough stuff that comes with it.
Oh yeah, I mean it's the same thing with everything, right? With relationships or
Hmm.
bad childhoods. You're like, oh, it wasn't so bad, and then you remember like living in that moment and being like, I just want to be 18 and not be here anymore. Like, you know what I mean? Like, I just
Yeah.
want to go far, far away. But then you're like, it wasn't so bad, was it? And then you start to just wonder. And it is the same way with the military, and that's why veterans really need to. I want to plug this again. Veterans really do need to realize that transition from active duty or whatever to civilian is much hard. It's much harder than anyone can ever prepare you for. Even
Hmm.
myself wanting. I mean, I basically, like I told you, I got in, and from like day one, I've been saying I'm going to get out. I'm going to get out. I'm still in, right? I'm still reservist. Like, but from day one, I was like, I'm going to get out. I'm going to get out. I'm going to get out. And then when I transitioned from active duty to civilian, I felt so lost. Like I literally
Yeah.
felt like I was falling. It was weird.
Well, it's such a strange dynamic. We could talk about this for hours, but it's such a dynamic of like you have such purpose and meaning, and people are like, "Oh, we love you and thank you for your service," and all this kind of stuff. And then you transition, and you might be like an E8 and have all this power and authority, and whatever, or captain or major or whatever, and then you get out and you start a career somewhere, and nobody cares.
Nobody cares.
Yeah.
Nobody cares. I mean, people are like, what? Like, what is that even? Like, you
Right.
know
They
what
don't
I
care that
mean?
you were a major. That's they think that might that they're like, cool story, bro. But other than that, like it's not really giving you any equity in your business or in your relationships, or in some cases it does. But for the large majority of us, it's that's not the case.
No, 100%. It's so and you're right. I was thinking, I was like, if you ever want to chat about that, we could chat about that forever, right? Because living in transition is like a military motto.
Yeah,
You're always living in transition.
absolutely. I would love to have you come back on maybe 6 months and just talk through being a woman, being a minority, being these things in the military, and then maybe that transition in and out, and just do a podcast just on that outside of the true crime stuff.
Yeah.
I would love. I mean, you're great. I think you have such good energy. You're obviously a beautiful person inside and out, and so I'm glad we got connected. I really appreciate your time today and coming and just sharing your story and sharing about your podcast. I hope our listeners will go check out some of your episodes and see if they like it and listen to it and learn how to protect themselves, look at red flags, and just be entertained because I think you're doing a great job. And the episodes I listened to were awesome and engaging and. So I really appreciate your time, and anything I can do to help you. I mean, I know we're connected with a few people, so anything I can do to help you, let me know.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. It was such a pleasure to just be able to talk kind of in a different environment because my podcast is so structured, like it's so like I structure it so differently. But it's nice to chat, and I really do like people to realize that sometimes they look at people influencers, micro influencers, and they're like, oh, they live the perfect life. And it's like, I go to counseling. Sometimes I feel like I'm failing. Every day I feel like I'm failing. And I have
Right.
to remind myself, I am a daughter of Christ, and I'm not failing so long as I get back up. And I think that's the number one thing for people to remember.
That's awesome. Yeah, I think, people would die to have 3 million downloads, and they think that if they can achieve that and get to that perspective or 50 million down or whatever they measure themselves by, and they think, well, if I finally reach that and get that, I'll feel fine. And I love these conversations because that's the vulnerability of, boasting in our weaknesses. Scripture says is like, it's not this self-flagellation of like, oh, I'm terrible. It's, man, I am weak. And, whether I have 3 million viewers or listeners or whatever, or 100, my identity's not in that stuff, right? It's in who Christ says that I
Exactly.
am. And I'm going to fail. I'm going to screw up. But the reality is your worth and value and your security in him doesn't change. And so I just encourage you with that. Just keep remembering that, keep walking in that. I'm proud of you for doing the work. It's really tough to do therapy, even though I go and I love it and obviously do it every day with people. I'm like, I don't want to go today. I don't want to be vulnerable about this. I don't want to share about this dumb thing that I did. I don't want to express my feelings. Sometimes I go in and I want to, but sometimes I'm like, ugh. Every time afterwards, I'm like, I'm so glad that I did, right? That was so helpful, so impactful, and it paves the way for the rest of the week. So I hope this episode for you guys listening does that. It's encouraging. It lets you see that whatever you do it to your fullest, right? Do it to have purpose, have meaning. If you hang sheetrock, if you're a podcaster, if you're a pastor, if you're a teacher, whatever you do, you have so much influence over the people that you're around and that you're engaged with. And find a way this week to make a difference. Find a way to go, how can I use my job and my work to move the kingdom forward? And whatever it is, Scripture says that you're looking for, if it's done in that way and in that will, it's going to be added to you. So thank y'all for listening. God bless you and have a good week.